Hi, everyone. This is Tom Grisak on Saturday, May 22nd, 2021. This video is going to be on one of my more painful experiences in real estate. This happened maybe 30 years ago, 32 years ago, something like that. I started out as a commercial realtor, and we call realtors brokers in commercial, but I started out as a commercial broker. Working kind of an area where, if you're not familiar with Dallas, it's along Harry Hines and the Walnut Hill, Stemmons area, Brook Hollow. So commercial guys will know it very well because it is a pretty heavily industrial area. So that's really where I cut my teeth. I learned the business in commercial and then parlayed that into residential about 21 years ago. So what happened on this transaction, I actually had a guy tell me he wouldn't buy the Empire State Building from me for $100. Now, if you look at that, you're thinking, man, I really must have stuck it to this guy. But the exact opposite happened. And this kind of goes to show you can do everything right and do your best for a client, and it can still come back to you as a negative in their eyes. And that's just going to happen in this business. All you can do is your best. You can try your best, and you'll never make everybody happy. But what this particular situation was, this gentleman, and I'll call him Ned, he is a businessman who owned a building off of Harry Hines. And if you know the Dallas area, you know that can be a pretty seedy neighborhood over there. The stretch along Harry Hines has a lot of strip clubs. It may be cleaning out now, but back then it was pretty rough. And this gentleman ran his business one street over, had an office, but he had really done well buying warehouse buildings right along Harry Hines. Then he would lease those buildings out to probably less than quality tenants. He told me that strip clubs or people that deal in that third world that I didn't want to be involved with. He said they pay their money on time and in cash every day of the month. So he would buy these buildings at industrial prices and then turn them into retail. So even though we parted on not great terms, I learned a lot from him. And one of the other lessons I learned from him, I'll share later on. It was a real good lesson for me. In this particular case, I had found a building that was exactly what he was looking for. And we went over, took a look at it, said, yeah, I'll buy that building. Well, during the course of the transaction, I found out there was some real hair on this deal. And by that, I don't remember exactly what the circumstances were, but I thought this building could end up being a problem for this seller. And I don't know if he's aware of it. I know he was a very astute investor. And, there's that school of thought, they're big boys, let them take care of themselves. But I felt that my conscience wouldn't let me just go to this closing and have him hanging this over his head. So I had mentioned to him there could be a problem with it, and he didn't think much about it. So a couple of days before the closing, I just felt like this was going to be an issue. And I said, Ned, I just want to make sure you know there could be problems on this deal. And he said, I'm not worried about it. I'll take care of it. Well, this was a time early in my career that I really needed that money. I as a new agent, 2 or 3 years in the business, this was probably a $13,000, $14,000 commission. And like all new agents, I was struggling to make it with Rhonda. And I really wanted to make this deal and needed to make the deal. But there was a little guy sitting on my shoulder saying, Tom, you have to warn him one more time that could be a problem here. So he said, I'm fine with it. And then my conscience was clear. We got to the closing. And back then, the buyers and sellers closed in the same room along with the agents. Well, we're at the closing. The seller, this issue came up, and the seller wanted the seller wanted the buyer to pay an additional $13,000 or $14,000, which was really, that was about my entire commission. And wait a minute. So to continue the story, we got to the closing, and back then, this was So we got to the closing, and at the closing, so we got to the closing, and back then it was typical for the buyer and the seller and the agents to all meet in the same table in the same room and close at the same time. Bad idea. Because if there's any misunderstanding and there's money that someone wants to make on one side or the other, they're always going to look at the agents and think those guys are making good money. Let's get them to kick in for what we can't agree on. Sure enough, the buyer of the property who I was representing wanted the sellers to discount the building by about $14,000, which was my commission, the whole thing. And of course, the seller said, "No, we're not going to do that," and the buyer backed away. Well, what happens when a buyer backs away and the contract has run its course and everybody has done what their due diligence on the contract, the buyer will lose their earnest money. And in this case, I don't remember how much earnest money was down. It was $5,000 or $6,000. And the guy was stubborn. He was a shrewd individual, but very, very stubborn. And I think he felt like he had an edge over the sellers, and the sellers weren't going to be manipulated. They just said, "No, we're not going to do it." So didn't close, although we're sitting right there. It never did close. And from that point on, I tried to get in touch with this buyer, and he wouldn't return my calls. And normally he'd call me right back. So I wasn't willing to accept that he didn't know this entire situation. And I decided I'm not going to let this I may lose him as a client, and I probably have, but I'm going to find out exactly why he thinks that I was the cause of him losing that money when I'd warned him twice that there could be a problem with that building. So when he wouldn't call me back, this is probably not a lot of people would have done this, but I went to his office and knocked on his door to ask his secretary. I said, "I'd like to come in and talk to Ed." So I walked in and I explained to him what happened in my eyes and how I tried to protect him. And he said, "Tom, I wouldn't buy the Empire State Building from you for $100. So I ended up losing that client. I said, "Okay, I've tried, Ned, I can't do anything more than trying." And I walked out, and that was my end of my relationship with him. But that was a very important lesson that I learned early on. As I said, you can do your best, you can try your best, but there are some people that you're just not going to make happy. And in a case like this, when I really needed that money, and my morals were tested because I could have kept my mouth shut, and I didn't. That told me right then that I have the honesty and the integrity to I may not survive in the business, but I won't lose sleep at night. I'll always do the right thing. And I always have done the right thing. There have been cases where maybe the buyer and the seller and I disagree, but no one can ever say that they've been misled or I've pulled the wool over their eyes or I've taken advantage of them. All you have in this business is your reputation, and I protect that very, very closely, as I do with all of our agents. All of our agents I feel the exact same way about. So a good lesson for me, and it shaped my entire career, and I'm glad that happened early in my career. I lost a potential client, but I think the end result was I tested my character, and I came out with flying colors, and I kept that. I realized if I was in a situation like that and I did the right thing, I would never worry about being tested again. So that's one of the many stories I've got, and I'll be sharing some more with you. Some are great. Some of them are actually a little embarrassing, things that I've done in the past as a new agent. So be looking forward to seeing videos on that. Thank you.